When my sister mocked me at dinner, her fiancé recognized me from the courtroom. The second my sister called out my name with that mocking laugh, the entire room fell into the kind of silence you could cut with a knife. Every single person had their eyes locked on me, wine glasses frozen midair, forced smiles slowly fading, and that's exactly when she chose to humiliate me in front of everyone. I'm Sarah Mitchell, and that evening was meant to celebrate my younger sister's upcoming wedding, not become an opportunity for her to tear me apart in front of her closest friends, her fiancé's family, and practically half the city's elite social crowd. We'd gathered at this sophisticated downtown restaurant, the kind with floor-to-ceiling windows and ambient music playing just loud enough to fill the silence. I'd driven there directly after finishing my shift, wearing a modest black dress with my hair tied back in a simple bun, no accessories except the watch I wore every day. My sister Emma looked me up and down with that familiar expression of disapproval before her lips curved into a smirk. "Oh, wow," she declared, raising her voice as she clinked her champagne glass to grab everyone's attention. "You're still dressing like you work at some dusty old bookstore or something." She gestured toward me with an exaggerated sweep of her hand. "Everyone, meet my older sister, Sarah. She's so secretive about her job that none of us actually know what she does all day." The table erupted in scattered laughter. Someone from Emma's friend group leaned forward with a grin. "So come on, Sarah, what's the big mystery? Are you still stuck in some mind-numbing cubicle somewhere?" I felt that all-too-familiar tightness spreading across my chest. Throughout our childhood, Emma had always been the golden child, the center of attention, while I'd learned to blend into the background. Over the years, I'd made a conscious choice to keep my professional accomplishments to myself. Not out of embarrassment, but because bringing them up at family events always seemed to create tension and resentment. Taking a slow breath, I forced myself to smile politely. "I work in the public sector," I responded, keeping my answer deliberately vague. Emma let out an exaggerated groan and rolled her eyes so dramatically I thought they might get stuck. "See what I mean? So incredibly vague. That's basically code for, I don't actually have a real job," she announced. And the laughter around the table intensified, growing louder and more confident. But that's the exact moment I caught sight of her fiancé, Matthew. While everyone else was laughing at Emma's expense, he sat completely still. He wasn't even smiling. Instead, he was staring directly at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. The color had drained from his face, and his fork sat abandoned on his plate. His gaze kept darting from my face down to my wrist where my watch sat, then back up again, as if he was frantically trying to connect dots that were suddenly making him deeply uncomfortable. Emma noticed his unusual silence and elbowed him sharply in the ribs. "What's going on with you?" she hissed under her breath. Matthew cleared his throat audibly. He slowly pushed his chair back and stood up, his eyes never leaving my face. As though the 20 other people at the table had simply vanished into thin air. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice strained and careful. "Did you say your name is Sarah Mitchell?" I nodded, completely blindsided by the sudden change in atmosphere. He swallowed visibly, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Sarah Mitchell from the District Superior Court System?" The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. You could literally hear the soft electrical buzz of the overhead lighting fixtures in the silence that followed. Emma let out a forced, nervous laugh. "Matthew, what on earth are you even talking about right now?" But he remained standing, his posture rigid. "I'm a defense attorney," he explained, his voice gaining strength as he spoke directly to me. "Judge Sarah Mitchell oversees several cases in the district where I practice. I've appeared before her in court multiple times." His voice wavered slightly. "You're the judge everyone talks about." Every single head at that table whipped around to face me in perfect unison. My sister's smug, self-satisfied expression crumbled like a sandcastle hit by a wave. "That's not even remotely funny," she stammered, but all the confidence had evaporated from her voice. I finally broke my silence, keeping my tone measured and professional. I generally don't discuss my position at family gatherings, I explained quietly. I've always believed in maintaining clear boundaries between my professional responsibilities and my personal relationships. Matthew nodded emphatically, almost frantically. She's incredibly well respected in the legal community, he added, his tone carrying a note of genuine admiration. Everyone knows Judge Mitchell as someone who's firm but always fair in her rulings. The energy in the room transformed completely in that instant. The same people who'd been openly mocking me just moments earlier suddenly couldn't maintain eye contact, or they stared at me with newfound curiosity and barely concealed fascination. Emma's face turned bright crimson, the flush spreading down her neck. "Why wouldn't you tell me something like that?" she demanded, her voice rising with a mix of embarrassment and anger. I turned to face her directly, keeping my expression neutral. "You never genuinely asked," I replied calmly. "And on the rare occasions when you did show interest, you immediately turned it into some kind of joke at my expense." The remainder of that evening felt like it dragged on for hours. Apologies started trickling in, awkward and uncomfortable, from people who'd been laughing at Emma's jokes just minutes before. The cruel comments were hastily replaced with exaggerated compliments and obvious attempts at flattery. Emma barely spoke another word for the rest of the dinner, and when she did manage to say something, her voice had lost all its earlier bite and sarcasm. As I gathered my things to leave, Matthew stood up and approached me separately. He thanked me quietly for maintaining my integrity and professionalism, both inside the courtroom and outside of it. Stepping out into the cool evening air felt like finally being able to breathe properly again. As I walked across the parking lot toward my car, something clicked into place in my mind. I understood then that I'd never needed to announce my position or credentials to earn anyone's respect. The truth has its own power, its own gravity. It doesn't need to be shouted from rooftops or used as a weapon in petty arguments. Eventually, inevitably, the truth reveals itself, standing firm on its own foundation, exactly the way I'd always tried to carry myself through life. Some people spend their entire lives demanding recognition, fighting desperately to prove their worth to anyone who'll listen. But real respect, genuine respect, isn't something you can demand or manufacture. It's something you earn through consistent action, through the choices you make when nobody's watching, through the integrity you maintain even when it would be easier to compromise. That night taught me that silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's the most powerful response you can give. Emma had spent years trying to diminish me, to make herself feel bigger by making me seem smaller. And I'd let her, not because I was ashamed of what I'd accomplished, but because I understood something she didn't. My worth wasn't dependent on her acknowledgement or anyone else's validation. Looking back now, I don't feel anger toward my sister or anyone else at that table. Instead, I feel something closer to pity. They'd been so quick to judge, so eager to laugh at someone they'd decided wasn't worth their respect, without ever bothering to look beneath the surface or ask a single genuine question. The incident became something of a turning point in my relationship with Emma. She reached out a few days later with what seemed like a sincere apology, admitting she'd let jealousy and insecurity drive her to treat me poorly for years. Our relationship is still a work in progress, but at least now it's built on honesty rather than assumptions and resentment. As for Matthew, he later told me that he'd recognized my watch, a distinctive timepiece I wear daily, before he'd even fully processed my name. He'd seen it countless times from the defense table, always wondering about the person behind the bench who wore it. That small detail, that tiny piece of consistency, had been enough to trigger his memory and change the entire trajectory of that evening. The experience reinforced something I'd always believed, but sometimes struggled to practice. You don't owe anyone an explanation for who you are or what you've accomplished. The people who matter, who genuinely care about you, will take the time to learn those things through relationship and conversation, not through boasting or performance. So here's what I learned from being publicly mocked at my sister's engagement dinner. Stay true to yourself. Let your work speak louder than your words. Maintain your integrity even when people try to diminish you. And remember that the truth doesn't need you to defend it aggressively. It has a way of defending itself when the time is right. Thanks for taking the time to hear my story. If it resonated with you or made you think differently about how we judge others, I'd love to hear about it. Sometimes the quietest people in the room have the most interesting stories to tell. You just have to be willing to listen.